Hey guys, Argent here. So, this is a topic I have been kind of avoiding because frankly it depresses me too much. It's the same reason I didn't really do anything on the refugee crisis until very recently. Because as I said, this whole thing I just find so depressing, I don't even really like to talk about it. Also, I was trying to be charitable and trying to not badmouth the Holy Father, but I just feel I have to speak on it if for no reason other than for you and my listeners who are probably have been wondering what my opinion is. So I don't think it's any secret that I don't particularly like the current pontiff. Um I I I will go through why I don't like him. First and foremost, his entire humbleness thing just is very superficial and fake feeling to me. Um, it just seems like kind of status signaling and just kind of like a media campaign. It just feels like some PR guy cooked it up somewhere. Now I get that he was like this before, but when you become pope, it's a bit different. If it didn't get as much press, if it didn't get him so reported, and it wasn't treated as such a thing by the media, um, would this really would he be doing all the same stuff? I don't know. I kind of doubt it. A lot of the stuff just seemed like PR stunts to me, like the whole thing of him carrying his own suitcase, getting off of the private charter jet, or him going to eat with the workers, or just any of his stuff. It just seems like he's more trying to, whenever an election happens and politicians are like, "Oh, I'm just one of you," and they'll come up with a pickup truck and that kind of thing. It just feels like that to me. Now I get this is a bit different because he's lived like this since forever, and this is a lifelong thing. But I kind of feel once you become pope, you're a monarch. There's a certain dignity to your office. There's nothing wrong with being a bit humble. There's nothing wrong with trying to set an example. But in the current pontiff's case, it just feels like that's his primary concern. And this brings me to my big issue with Pope Francis and most of modern Catholicism. I'm not actually a hardcore traditionalist. I think I've said that numerous times. I'm not even really a traditionalist. But something I feel very strongly about is the increasing secularization of the church. Now, what do I mean by that? Obviously, we still have a pope, we still have priests, we still have bishops, but I find almost never do we talk about faith anymore. We almost never talk about theology anymore. Um, if I was an alien come to Earth, I would think that the Catholic Church is something like the Red Cross. It's there to give stuff to people. Now, there's nothing wrong with charity. Charity's always been a part of Christian virtue since forever. Humbleness has always been part of Christian virtue since forever. But the core purpose of the church isn't to provide for the poor. That's not what it's there for. That's something it does, but that's part of a greater mission. The mission of the church is to bring salvation to the world through the gospel of Jesus Christ and the Bible, and just through to just bring salvation to the world and to revere God and to pay Him honor. That's what the church exists for. The church doesn't exist to fix social problems. It doesn't exist to fix um, to redistribute wealth. That's not what it's there for. It's there to pay honor to God and to save souls. And I feel in general that is what modern Catholicism is. Almost always when I'm in church, the homily doesn't really talk about God anymore. It's almost like they're embarrassed about God. We just talk about, oh, social justice, oh, accepting people, oh, materialism, all that stuff. And like some of that stuff is true, but ultimately that's not what it's about. It's about um, a institution that is set up there to serve as a conduit of divine grace and divine salvation, and the mission is to convert and save the world. It's not a secular mission. The church has secular power, of course. It has secular property. It has to, but that's not the primary issue. And I find virtually everything Pope Francis says, with the exception of a couple little statements, which are latched onto the people who are desperately trying to save this rapidly sinking pontificate, aren't related to that. They're all about basically social justice issues. And social justice, in one form or another, has always been part of church teaching. But even then, he does it in a very biased left wing way, a very secular way. He doesn't really talk about moral issues. He occasionally will reference abortion, but he won't come out strong on gay marriage. He won't, like, when Ireland was having a referendum, he should have gone there and campaigned against it, but he didn't. He didn't even really issue a strong condemnation on it. He doesn't really care. He kind of doesn't seem to believe the papacy has moral or spiritual power, that it just exists for the sole purpose of advancing political causes, which isn't what it's there for. Um, Maybe if they were Catholic political causes, but he doesn't seem interested in that either. And I think that brings it to that's ultimately my biggest issue with Pope Francis. He seems to just not really care about the people who depend upon him. All the faithful Catholics who look to him for leadership, he couldn't care less about them. He cares about some random Muslims who are probably members of ISIS. He cares about non-Christians a lot. He cares about people who are divorced and remarried, or people who have abortions. But he doesn't really seem to care about the people who support him. He doesn't really seem to care about the church, about the people who are fighting on a daily basis to save the ship. And people say, well, you're being more Catholic than the Pope. Well, yeah, you are if the Pope doesn't seem to care, if he expresses little more than mild concern for the implosion of the faith. We have real issues. We have countries where mass attendance has fallen 80% since Vatican II. In Quebec, Catholicism's virtually disappeared. We have all these issues, and he just doesn't seem to care. He doesn't seem to care about any of it. He doesn't seem to care about fake Catholic politicians. He doesn't seem to care about the elimination of catechesis. He doesn't seem to care about secularization, um, a loss of Christian culture, of Christian society. All he seems to care about is appearing humble and preaching left wing social justice issues. That's it. If he was talking about workers' rights or the elderly or youth unemployment, in addition to the other stuff, that would be fine. But he doesn't, generally speaking. And you can blame the media all you want, but he has media consultants. The Vatican has their own media. If he really wanted to have a different narrative, he would have a different narrative. I don't think we can keep making excuses and blame the media for everything. The media are snakes. We know the media are snakes. The media have been snakes for decades now. That's no excuse for letting them control the entire narrative and not seeming to care that the narrative is bad. Um, Pope Francis is. It's interesting because the Remnant did an article praising him. The Remnant is a traditionalist Catholic newspaper, and their argument for praising him was that he he has basically made people pick a side. He is unlike Pope Benedict, where there was to some extent Pope Benedict was similar. John Paul II was just kind of a guy everybody could love. I ultimately don't think he really stood for that much. I ultimately think he did more harm than good. But he was a guy who most people could say, oh, he's not really objectionable. He's just a good guy. Who doesn't like John Paul II? Benedict drove a lot of liberal Catholics out. And he kind of he started the polarization. I think polarization is good because we need a civil war because we're losing the peace. It's nice to have someone who's openly secular, who's openly like a modernist, who's openly indifferent to church teachings, because it's preferable to having another couple decades of just weak leadership. And I'm not saying Pope Benedict was a weak leader, but ultimately he was driven out because there's still a huge presence of people within the church at high levels of power who won't realize how bad things have gotten, and won't realize how bad things have gotten until we have someone like Francis who basically starts a civil war. And that's what he's doing, because he is a happy medium. He is not liberal enough, and indeed I don't know if a pope could be liberal enough to please liberal Catholics in the left. The left is by its nature increasingly grows increasingly radical, and I don't really think there's much anything that could actually please them. So we have that. At the same time, though, he is nowhere near what even the most moderately conservative Catholics would consider a good pope. Most of them have disdain for him. The few remaining loyalists who, like EWTN, etc., who basically remain loyal out of loyalty to the papal office, and because a lot of them are ultramontists, they increasingly have to make increasingly feeble excuses for him. A lot of traditionalist Catholics who were not really involved with church politics have increasingly gotten involved with church politics, and many of them have kind of embraced that this is going to be an open war. We've started to see this on all fronts, and things will get a lot worse before they get better. That's kind of though a good thing though, because it prevents people from taking a squishy middle position. It makes people face very real um, problems. It's rather than kicking the. I'm trying to think of how to describe it. Rather than just kicking the ball down the road, it's a bit like what the financial crisis did to um, most of the West. We're no longer secure enough that we can afford to be stupid. We no longer can reliably expect that we'll just keep getting decent popes, that somehow the church will keep limp along. We have a man who in a very real sense, could destroy the church. And I mean, there will always be a church, but if he starts issuing too many more, like, just out there decrees or whatever, eventually a lot of people will be driven into sedevacantism. And all the while, the church will continue to hemorrhage more liberal Catholics. So it's kind of at the moment we're in a contest of last men standing. Will the Vatican II era priests like Pope Francis and the liberal Vatican II era Catholics retire first, or will the younger priests and younger Catholics who are more conservative, will they take power? It's a very interesting question. I'm not really sure. I think eventually, because you can't ever please the left, nothing will ever be enough for them, that it will eventually swing back towards the right, and we'll actually get another pope, maybe like Benedict or someone who's a bit to the right of Benedict, who will be able to start trying to clean up some of these massive issues. But that's really the only silver lining. Overall, I just don't talk much about Pope Francis, or Pope Humble the First, as the Revenant likes to call him, just because it's depressing. It's depressing to see your religion led by a guy like him, a guy who really doesn't seem to care much about the church or the people that he's supposed to be leading, and who only cares about other people. Of course, a Christian should care about other people, but he's a shepherd, and he should be tending to his flock first and foremost. That's his authority is primarily over Catholics, and he doesn't seem to care about Catholics. And I understand he's in a tough position, but in the end, all men must die. And in the end, things are going to happen anyways. So the left will never be pleased. You can't placate Muslims. You can't placate the modern world. You have to take a strong stand against these things, or you're just going to keep delaying the inevitable and hemorrhaging more and more people who would otherwise support you. So I think we can be grateful for the clarity, if nothing else. I like clarity in political issues. I don't even care if my side wins. I just want people to be faced with a clear choice and a clear situation. And I think, if nothing else, Pope Francis brings us that, as bad as he is otherwise. So those are my thoughts on the matter. I'm sorry if you wanted me to get a bit angrier. He is the Pope, and I'm trying to show respect for him. So that's why I'm not swearing or mocking him. This is just my feelings as someone who is deeply injured by this. Um, yeah. So this is Argent Templar signing out.